Lyra stood at the balcony of the Grand Palace, her eyes tracing the distant horizon, where the sky bled into the rolling hills of Zeloria. The planet had once been a symbol of strength, a place where her people thrived under the rule of her family. But now, as the war dragged on, those hills seemed to fade into a never-ending gray, much like the kingdom she was meant to lead. The war had taken everything from them: resources, lives, and hope. And yet, there was a part of Lyra that still couldn't understand how it had all gone so wrong. The war had started years ago, a struggle between Zeloria and the humans on Earth. It wasn't supposed to last this long. There were times when it felt like they could win, and other times when it seemed like the endless conflict would never end. As a child, Lyra had never seen the war as something personal. It was just the reality her people had lived with for generations. But now, standing on the cusp of adulthood, she was beginning to question everything. Her father, King Oron, had been the one to declare war, rallying his people to defend their way of life. It was for the future of Zeloria, they'd said. Lyra had believed that once. But as the years passed and the casualty reports came in, as the refugees arrived at the gates of the palace, she began to wonder. And then came the humans whose very presence on Zeloria's soil had sparked a rebellion. A rebellion that Lyra had seen from the safety of her royal chambers, but one that still haunted her dreams. She remembered the stories, the battles, the destruction, the lives lost, and yet she had never once thought about the faces of the people fighting on the other side. Not until now. The Peace Summit was about to begin, and Lyra had been invited to participate in a historic event. This was her moment. The moment when she would sit alongside the leaders of the human forces and negotiate the terms of peace. A treaty that would end the bloodshed and bring her people back from the brink of destruction. It was the perfect opportunity for Lyra to prove that she was capable of leading her people into a new era, one of peace and prosperity. But as she walked through the grand hall of the palace, her heart began to race. She wasn't nervous, not in the way one might expect. No, she was anxious about something much deeper. There, standing at the far end of the room, was a man she never thought she would see again. Ethan, he had been her childhood friend. The boy she had laughed with, played games with, and shared stories about their hopes for the future. They had lived in a neutral zone when they were young, a place where the Zelorians and humans could meet without the shadow of war. It was there in that peaceful sanctuary that she had first met Ethan. Back then, he had been just a boy, full of dreams and aspirations. He had told her that one day he would be a soldier fighting for justice. She had never believed him. She thought it was just a child's fantasy. But now, as she looked across the room, she saw the man he had become, a decorated war hero, standing proud among the human delegation. His uniform was adorned with medals, a testament to his bravery and leadership on the battlefield. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met across the room. It was as if time itself had frozen. She could see the years in his face, the changes that had come with the war. The boy she had once known had been replaced by a man who had seen more than his fair share of loss and victory. But it wasn't just the man he had become that struck her. It was the realization that Ethan, her childhood friend, had been fighting on the opposite side of this war. He had been a soldier, a hero, the one who had led his people to victory, the one who had brought an end to the war she had once believed in. She couldn't take her eyes off him. Her heart raced in her chest, and for a moment she wondered if he remembered her. The sound of footsteps behind her broke her trance. Her father, King Oron, had entered the room, his face stern and unreadable. "Lyra," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "are you ready for the summit?" She turned to face him, nodding. "Yes, father, I am ready." But as she followed him to the meeting hall, her mind remained with Ethan. The memories of their time together as children flooded her thoughts, and she realized how little she truly knew about the man he had become. She had no idea what had happened to him in the years since they had last spoken. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "This is a crucial moment for our kingdom, Lyra. You must be strong. You must show them that we are a people worthy of peace." But all Lyra could think about was Ethan, the boy she had known, and the man who had shaped the course of history. As they entered the meeting hall, Lyra found herself searching for him again. Her eyes scanned the room, and there, in the center of the human delegation, she saw him once more. He was talking with another officer, but his eyes flicked toward her, and for a brief second, their gazes locked once again. It was then that she knew. She could no longer view him as just a distant memory. Ethan was not the boy she had known anymore. He had become the hero who had won the war, and somehow in the chaos of the past, their paths had crossed once more. Lyra took a deep breath. The fate of her people and her own heart was about to change forever. Lyra stood before the large table where the human delegates were already seated. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her every movement, waiting for her to speak. The room was filled with a mixture of tension and anticipation, but Lyra's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't focus on the talks, not when her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. After the brief exchange of glances earlier, Lyra had hoped that she could simply let go of the past, that she could stay focused on the future of her people. But as she sat across from the human delegation, she couldn't escape the pull of the memory of a simpler time when the world hadn't been divided by war. When she and Ethan had been children, sitting under the wide, open sky, sharing dreams about the future. Now, as she looked at him, the man who had become a hero, all those dreams seemed like they belonged to someone else. The man in front of her had seen things she couldn't even begin to imagine. He had led soldiers into battle, made decisions that would shape the course of history, and lived through things she would never understand. But there was something in his eyes, something she recognized from the boy he once was. Despite the medals, the uniform, and the hardened expression, there was a hint of something softer beneath. It was a fleeting moment, but she caught it. He still remembered her. The discussion in the room began. Her father spoke of the terms they hoped to achieve in the peace treaty. He emphasized the importance of securing Zeloria's position in the New World Order, maintaining their sovereignty, and ensuring that their people would not be left to suffer under the human victors' rule. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she listened to her father's words. She understood his position. He was a king, a leader who had spent his entire life fighting for his people's survival, but something in her shifted. The more she listened, the more the reality of the situation hit her. Zeloria had lost. They had lost the war. And no matter how hard her father tried to spin it, they would never regain what they had lost. The destruction, the lives that had been taken, it was irreversible. Her gaze flicked once more to Ethan. He was listening intently, his face betraying no emotion. But as his eyes met hers again, she could see it. A flicker of recognition, of shared memories, of something beyond the politics. For a brief moment, the weight of the war seemed to fade, and they were back to being two children who had once been friends. The conversation in the room continued, but Lyra couldn't focus on the words anymore. Her mind was consumed by the questions that had been rising ever since she had seen Ethan. How had he become the hero he was? How had he changed so much? And why, when he was now everything that her people had been taught to hate, did she still feel that pull toward him? The meeting dragged on, with both sides discussing the terms of the treaty, the exchange of prisoners, and the future of their respective people. But none of it mattered to Lyra. All she could think about was Ethan, the man who had led the charge that had brought an end to the war, the man who had likely seen things she could never understand. Finally, after what felt like hours, the meeting broke for a short break. Lyra stood up, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She excused herself, stepping away from the table and out into the hallway. The cool air of the corridor hit her like a wave, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. She had to talk to him. She had to know what had happened to him. She couldn't stand the feeling of uncertainty any longer, the feeling that she was standing in the middle of a story she didn't understand, a story that had torn her world apart. Without thinking, she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but she knew she had to find him. She couldn't let this chance slip away, not when so much had changed between them. Not when there was still so much she needed to know. As she reached the end of the hallway, she saw him, Ethan. He was standing by a large window, looking out at the ruined landscape beyond. His back was to her, but she could see the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were slightly hunched, as if the weight of the world was on his back. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But then, as if he had sensed her presence, he turned around. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It was as if time had frozen, the world outside them no longer mattered. It was just the two of them, two people who had once shared a childhood, now standing on opposite sides of a war that had shaped them both. Lyra, Ethan said softly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. It's been a long time. She nodded, her throat tightening. I never thought I would see you again. I didn't think I'd see you either, he said, taking a step toward her. You look different. But I can still see it. You're still the same. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was a strange comfort hearing him say that, but there was a sadness in his voice, a sadness that she couldn't ignore. How did you end up here? Lyra asked, her voice trembling. How did you become the hero? Ethan's expression darkened, and for a moment he looked away, his gaze distant. It wasn't something I planned. I didn't want this war, but sometimes the choices we make lead us down paths we can't avoid. I did what I had to do. To protect the people I loved, to stop the war. Lyra swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She had always thought of Ethan as just a boy, a friend. But now, standing before her, he was a soldier, a hero. He had fought for something bigger than himself, something that had cost him more than she could understand. And now, Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. Now, Ethan paused, looking at her with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Now we have a chance at peace. But peace comes with a price. Lyra nodded, her heart heavy with the realization of what that price was. She had never truly understood the cost of war, not until now. Not until she had seen Ethan again and heard the pain in his voice. As the silence between them stretched, Lyra knew that this was only the beginning. There were still so many questions, so many things they needed to say to each other. But for now, standing there in that quiet hallway, she knew one thing for certain. Ethan was no longer the boy she had once known. He was a man forged by war. And she, too, was no longer the princess she had once been. The world was changing, and so were they. Lyra paced restlessly in her private quarters, the walls of the palace feeling as though they were closing in around her. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was shifting within her, something that she didn't fully understand. The talks had gone on for hours that day, but her mind had been far away, lost in the conversation she had had with Ethan. It was difficult to concentrate on peace treaties when the war, the people, the choices, and the very future of her kingdom hung in the balance. The sound of footsteps broke through her thoughts. A servant entered, bowing low. "Your Highness," he said softly, "your father requests your presence in the council chambers." Lyra nodded absent-mindedly, her mind still on Ethan. She had asked him so many questions, but his answers had only raised more. He had spoken of his role in the war, how he had led his men, how he had fought for something bigger than himself, but there was so much more she wanted to know. How had he felt knowing that he was fighting on the other side? How had he been able to make those decisions, to live with them? There was a knock on the door, interrupting her thoughts. She turned to see her father standing in the doorway, his expression as stern as ever. "Lyra," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "It's time." She nodded, following him down the long hallway toward the council chambers. Her father didn't speak, and Lyra didn't ask any questions. She knew what was coming. The meeting would be the final one before the treaty was signed. It would decide the future of Zeloria, her people, and possibly even herself. The weight of it all pressed heavily on her shoulders. The council chamber was dimly lit, with long wooden tables and chairs arranged neatly around the room. The air was thick with tension as the various leaders of Zeloria and the human delegates gathered. Lyra took her seat at the head of the table, beside her father. She could feel the eyes of the others on her, waiting for her to speak, to take control. She was the princess, after all. It was her responsibility now to help guide the future of her people. But as she sat there, her thoughts drifted again to Ethan. He wasn't just a soldier now, he was a hero. And she was the daughter of the king who had led her people into war. She had been born into a life of privilege, but at what cost? Her kingdom was broken, and the very people she was meant to protect were suffering. The treaty could end the war, but it couldn't undo the damage that had already been done. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "Lyra," he said, his tone sharp, "we must make our position clear. The peace treaty is the only way to secure our future. Our people have already suffered too much. The humans will not give us more than this." Lyra looked at her father, then around the room at the other leaders. They were all waiting for her to speak. She could feel the pressure building inside her chest. The weight of the decisions she had to make was overwhelming. There was no turning back. Once the treaty was signed, there would be no going back to the way things were. The war would be over, but the aftermath would last a lifetime. As she opened her mouth to speak, her mind raced. She knew what her father expected of her. She knew that this was her moment to show her strength, to prove that she could lead. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she could go along with it. She wasn't sure if she could support a peace that came at the cost of everything she had once believed in. Her eyes flicked to the human delegates across the room. Ethan was there, standing at the back, his eyes fixed on her. She could see the same sadness in his expression that she felt in her own heart. He knew what this treaty meant. He knew what it would cost both sides, but he had made his peace with it. Hadn't he? Lyra's voice faltered. She cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. I agree with my father. This treaty is necessary. We cannot continue this war any longer. It has already taken too much from us. The words felt hollow in her mouth, and she immediately regretted them. It was as if she was betraying something deep inside her. She had always believed in the righteousness of her people's cause, but now she wasn't so sure. The room was silent for a moment, and Lyra could feel the eyes of the council members on her, waiting for her to continue. But she couldn't. She felt paralyzed, trapped in a situation where she was expected to make decisions that would shape the fate of her kingdom. How could she do this when she didn't even know where her own heart stood? She began again, but her father cut her off. You have made your decision, King Oron said, his voice firm. This treaty is the future of our people, and you will support it. Lyra's throat tightened, and she nodded slowly, though she could feel a growing sense of unease inside her. She had said the words she knew were expected of her, but the truth was that she wasn't sure if she could fully commit to this path. The peace they were signing would end the war, yes, but it would also leave a broken kingdom in its wake. As the meeting continued, Lyra barely registered the discussions around her. Her mind was a whirlwind, filled with images of Ethan. He had fought on the front lines, leading soldiers into battle, making decisions that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And yet, despite everything, he had stayed true to what he believed was right. He had fought for peace, for a future beyond the destruction. Her heart ached as she thought about their past, about the times they had spent together before the war had torn everything apart. She had been so naive then, so sure of the world around her. She had never imagined that the boy she had known, the boy who had dreamed of becoming a soldier, would one day be the man who brought the war to an end. Lyra stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her father's eyes locked onto her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of concern in his gaze. "Where are you going, Lyra?" he demanded. "I need some air," she said quietly, her voice shaky. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked quickly out of the room. She didn't stop until she reached the balcony again, the cool air greeting her like an old friend. She leaned against the railing, closing her eyes as she breathed in deeply. The world seemed so much clearer out here, away from the politics and the pressure of the council room. But even here, she couldn't escape the questions swirling in her mind. What had happened to her? What had happened to the girl who once believed in her kingdom's righteousness? Was it wrong to want peace, even if it came at the cost of everything they had fought for? As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Ethan. Lyra," he said softly, his voice carrying through the stillness of the night. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer at first, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "How did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How did you fight in that war, knowing that it was destroying everything?" Ethan was silent for a moment, as if contemplating her question. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is what you believe is right," he said quietly. "I fought because I thought it was the only way to end it, to stop the killing." Lyra turned to face him, her heart aching. "And now?" "Now," Ethan said, his expression unreadable, "now we hope that the peace we fought for is worth it." The days leading up to the signing of the peace treaty passed in a blur. Lyra couldn't remember when she had last slept through the night or when her mind had stopped racing. Every time she closed her eyes, the weight of the decision she was about to make pressed on her chest. She had tried to focus on the treaty, on the future of her people, but it was hard to concentrate when her heart was torn in so many directions. Her father's insistence that they go forward with the treaty never wavered. To him, peace was the only way to ensure the survival of their kingdom. But Lyra felt differently. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that peace wasn't just about ending the war. It was about rebuilding, healing, and confronting the past. And that was something neither her people nor the humans had fully faced yet. One evening, after another round of tense discussions in the council chamber, Lyra found herself once again walking through the empty halls of the palace. The palace had always been a place of comfort for her, a sanctuary where she had spent much of her childhood. But tonight it felt different. The walls seemed to close in around her, reminding her of everything she had lost. She paused in front of a large painting of the royal family, her ancestors, the kings and queens who had ruled over Zeloria for generations. The painting was old, the colors faded with time, but the faces of the royal family were still proud and strong. She had always admired them, looked up to them, thinking they had all the answers. But now, standing there alone, she realized that they had never been tested like this. They had never faced the reality of what war could do to a people, to a kingdom. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Ethan standing at the end of the hall, his figure silhouetted against the soft light spilling from a nearby window. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much that needed to be said, but the words felt stuck, like they were too heavy to be spoken aloud. "Lyra," Ethan said, his voice soft but steady. "Can we talk?" She nodded, her heart beating faster in her chest. She wanted to speak, to ask him everything that had been swirling in her mind for days. But instead, she simply followed him as he led her to a quiet garden at the back of the palace. The garden was serene, filled with flowers that had been carefully tended, their colors vibrant under the moonlight. It was a peaceful place, one that Lyra had visited many times as a child when she needed a moment to think. They sat on a bench beneath a large tree, the branches swaying gently in the night breeze. For a while, neither of them spoke. Lyra's hands rested in her lap, her fingers tightly clasped together. She felt the tension in the air, the unspoken emotions that hung between them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low. "You're worried about the treaty, I can see it." Lyra sighed, her breath shaky. "I'm not just worried about the treaty, I'm worried about everything, about what it means for us, for our people, and for you." Ethan's brow furrowed. "For me." "Yes," Lyra said, turning to face him. "You're a hero, Ethan. You led the humans to victory. You've seen things, done things that I can't even imagine, and now you're here with us. What happens when this treaty is signed? What happens to you?" Ethan didn't immediately answer. He leaned back on the bench, looking up at the stars above them. The silence stretched between them, and Lyra's heart pounded as she waited for him to speak. "I don't know what happens next," he said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I thought that when the war ended, things would be easier, but they're not. I thought that I could come back here and just move on, but nothing feels like it used to. I can't go back to the way things were before." Lyra swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I can't go back either," she whispered. "I don't know who I am anymore. The war has changed everything. My father wants this treaty. He says it's the only way forward, the only way to ensure our survival. But is it really the right choice? Can we ever be at peace when everything we've lost is still hanging over us?" Ethan turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't have the answers, Lyra. I wish I did. I fought for peace because I thought it was the only way to stop the fighting. But now I'm not so sure. I don't know if peace is enough. I don't know if it can heal everything we've been through." Lyra felt a lump form in her throat as she stared at Ethan. She wanted to say something to comfort him, but she wasn't sure if she could even comfort herself. The truth was, she felt lost. She didn't know what was right anymore. The war had left scars on both her kingdom and herself. And now, as the treaty loomed, she realized that signing it wouldn't make everything go away. It wouldn't erase the pain, the loss, or the divisions between their people. "I never thought it would be like this," Lyra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew what was right. I thought that being a princess meant knowing what to do, knowing how to lead. But now all I feel is doubt. I don't know what to believe in anymore." Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. You don't have to carry the weight of it all by yourself." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch. It was strange how something so simple could feel so comforting. But in that moment, it felt like the only thing holding her together. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if the treaty will bring peace or if it will just delay the inevitable. But I do know one thing. I can't do this without understanding the truth. I need to know what's really happened, not just the stories we've been told." Ethan nodded slowly, his expression serious. "And I need to understand, too. The war wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about what we were fighting for. And maybe that's what we need to focus on now. Not the past, but the future. What kind of future do we want to build?" Lyra took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the weight of their words. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. There was a part of her that still believed in the possibility of peace, in the possibility of healing. But that healing would take time. It would take understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to face the truth. "I don't know if I can make the right decision," Lyra said, her voice barely audible. "But I'm going to try." I'm going to try to find a way forward that doesn't ignore the past, but doesn't let it destroy us either. Ethan smiled, though it was a sad smile, one filled with the knowledge that the road ahead would be difficult. That's all any of us can do, Lyra. Try and hope. They sat together in silence for a while longer, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. The world outside was full of uncertainty, but in that moment, as they sat side by side, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward together.